Carroll. Dr. Carroll is an Irish doctor, graduate of medicine from the University College Dublin, where he received his master's degree in public health medicine. Previously the chairman of the board of ARC Cancer Support Centres and a member of the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine, among other accreditations. Thank you for taking the time, Doctor.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
That's great. Well, I know you've been an extremely busy man as of late, and we can get into the reasons why for that. But we seem to be trashing through a bit of stormy water here in Ireland at the moment. There's bills being proposed. People are taking to the streets. Property, fuel and food prices are all-time high. Young people are sick. And yet, on the radio, we still hear that culling the Corona-19 virus is still our greatest threat, and it's rampant in our society. In your opinion, is the virus and its containment still our main focus, or were there deeper issues regarding COVID and the vaccines beginning to surface lately?
I don't think the virus is our chief focus. It should never have been. It was chief focus, certainly when NPHET, or the Public Health Advisory Committee, seemed to be the de facto government of the country, and when the real government, the elected government that is, seemed to be mute and seemed to be ineffectual. I suppose those days have gone a little bit now. People have wised up to, I suppose, the way COVID was handled. I was talking to a politician quite recently in one of the government parties, and he said to me that if they were to do it again, probably do it differently. But it's late to be saying that at this stage. COVID is one of the things. I mean, the reality in this country, the vast majority of people technically now are not vaccinated simply because the vaccine, according to manufacturers, and I'm just using the vaccine because the manufacturers describe it thus. I mean, I'm aware that is a controversial term, but let's just use that word for a moment. I mean, they, by their admission, would say that the maximum benefit anybody gets out of it, their way of telling us, is 6 months at maximum. So the vast majority of people have not had vaccine in the last 6 months. So therefore, technically, everybody's exactly the way they were before the vaccines became available. So in other words, from a body point of view and all of that, we're more or less vulnerable. The difficulty there, of course, is that nothing has changed very much. It's never, ever a disease that was going to cause any major to the vast, vast majority of people. And in a very ingenuous way, we were never told whether people died because of COVID or with COVID. 2 Irish coroners, both in Mayo and in Kildare, did say over a year ago that trawled through their statistics, and each had about 300 records where COVID was mentioned, that something like 98% were people who were terminally ill with one type of disease or other, and were unlucky enough, in the words of one of the callers, were unlucky enough to get COVID as well. And I mean, all diseases, I suppose, at the end of life, especially viral disease, tend to the more vulnerable type of person. And at the very beginning, I mean, public health doctors, myself, were very much aware of that. And a plan was put in place, or a plan proposed rather, called the Great Barrington Declaration. And the Great Barrington is a city or a town in the East Coast of America. So the Great Barrington was a very simple one: protect the vulnerable and open up society. What we did was failed to protect the vulnerable and closed down society, which is the direct opposite of what the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed by numerous eminent public health doctors and professors of public health medicine throughout the world, to protect the vulnerable and open up society. That advice was completely inverted in this country, and we closed down society. And we failed to protect the elderly by discharging people from hospitals directly in nursing homes without any testing. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a criminal act, and it ought to be thoroughly investigated by public inquiry.
And I noticed as well that we seem to be seeing a lot less fear in general public. People who are once all for the vaccines and now holding off getting their latest booster. Why do you think that is?
Well, people are using their common sense. They realised that there are two sides to the story. I mean, we were only getting one side of the story for a very, very long time. And that side of the story was the official story. There was a government point of view, but that point of view was driven by NEFIT. Point of view was the only authorized point of view. There was no other point of view allowed, no other point of view given. There was no other expression of opinion. And if there was, it was shut down. The compliant press were subservient. They must have been in some way purchased. They were not in any way doing the job of good journalism, which is to have a sense of curiosity, to have a sense of inquiry, and to hold government to account. It was a bit like Pravda in Middle Europe, bad old days, where government and press were on the same hymn sheet. So people didn't have a choice. People had to depend upon filtered information, their own observations, and slowly but surely, people started talking to each other and realized they weren't the only ones thought like that. And now public are rising up, but not only regarding this, regarding a whole range of other things, because they now realize they have been betrayed by government, they've been betrayed by the media, they've been betrayed by official Ireland, if you like, and certainly they've been betrayed by the fake opposition parties. And people are beginning to realize that choice was not, did, and does not exist. A new way forward has been sought, and that happens when people talk together, act together, and think together, and is now beginning to happen.
Absolutely. And I say, as a doctor, it must have been very painful watching some of the advice being rolled out that was against even common sense, let alone the expertise of a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I don't know if you're...
Absolutely. And what was, what was painful, and what was very, very painful was the silence of my colleagues. And it's baffling, at least I thought it was baffling, until I realized the very opposite, that there's 21,000 doctors in Ireland. 21,000 doctors are policed, if you like, by the Medical Council, who for the most part over the last couple of days have been doing a good job. Generally, they monitor fairly light hand. They let doctors get on with their business. If any doctor appeared before the courts on something unsavoury, they were struck off. It didn't happen very often. There were inquiry into the way doctors behaved. Perhaps the of the Medical Council was a little bit too light, and I've recently become aware of cases where they seem to a very, if you like, negative approach to genuine complaints by the general public on a small number of rogue doctors. But having said that, they, for the most part, let the ordinary, hardworking, good doctor alone, if you like. But then all that changed with COVID. And people spoke outside with the official narrative. People like myself and a handful of other doctors, for example, we were inquired into by the Medical Council. The Medical Council took, in effect, a political point of view. The Medical Council is meant to be guided by the 1978 Medical Practitioners Act, the Good Act, and it helps police the profession. And the main thing is to take doctors out of the system who is a danger to the public. But they've chosen to define a danger to the public as a doctor in keeping with government policy, in keeping with NEFIT policy, which is outrageous, because medical science is all about debate. Medical science is all about peer-reviewed articles, about differences of opinion and the eventual forming of a consensus. Not about politics. We're not a political body. We're a professional body whose only aim is to help people as best as we can. But that has been taken away from us, because any doctor that spoke out of the official narrative ran risk of loss of livelihood, because the Medical Council can suspend you. The Medical Council can deprive you of your livelihood. And already one doctor, that has happened to a doctor already, and there's a number of doctors in the pipeline for that as well. And then when you think about it, members of the Medical Council have their membership approved by the Minister of Health. All members of the Medical Council, of which there are 23, can be moved by the Minister of Health. They are political. Don't play games with me. They are a political body. They are not a genuine independent body representing the interests of the public. They're representatives of their political patrons. So they are tainted and they're corrupt by that, as far as I am concerned. But they have controlled the narrative. That's what counts. So this is why a lot of are calling for the Medical Council to be abolished. to be inquired into. And if it can be shown that that decision making was by vested interests, and we don't know that because none of them have ever declared their vested interests, I believe they should be criminally prosecuted.
Absolutely. And I'm going to jump to a point as well to say, I'm sure you're aware that in the Dutch Parliament recently, that a spokesperson for Pfizer had said the COVID vaccines were never tested to stop transmission. And yet this narrative had spilled out to globally, where people who were unfairly discriminated against, they were banished from their social activities, lost their jobs, they were fined. In some countries, they're arrested and put in containment camps, all based on that lie to stop transmission. But yet, the Irish
Correct.
media is not publicising any of this. And when you bring it to the attention of some people, they're completely unaware of it. But surely this is a massive scandal of a proportion of times.
I would think so. I suppose one could say the media can publish what they want, but that's not the way it ought to be. I mean, normally the media is meant to have capacity. The media is meant to hold government to account. I mean, the media may, like all journalists, like all beings, may have a personal point of view, but that should not interfere with your professional competence, your ability to work in a professional way. It's remarkable that the media have one story. All the media are singing the same hymn sheet, and yet there are many sort of things that are occurring and that are in the public domain that are not being reported in the media, and there's a lot of stuff that is being reported in the media as well, but it's all in direction only. It's all part of massaging a narrative along, rather than giving choice, rather than showing the diversity of opinion. For example, a very good example of that, I mean, you mentioned a good example in the Dutch Parliament. Let me give you a very good example that happened in Ireland over the recent past. It includes the concept of ivermectin. Ivermectin is a well-known product. It's been on the go in the 1960s. Most farmer vets will be very familiar with it, as most doctors as well. But many directorates of public health medicine in other parts of the country have used it, in other parts of the world rather have used it prophylactic, in other words, to prevent people like health staff and vulnerable people getting COVID, and also for treating COVID as well. Directorates of public health medicine in other countries had no different than that, but in Ireland we didn't. The doctor prescribed ivermectin to be in serious trouble. I know 2 doctors are under inquiry, more or less, but the point is that if ivermectin was considered to be a treatment that was valid, then you couldn't possibly use vaccines which are emergency usage due to alternative. So they would have withdrawn. So we can see immediately the financial, the political pressure that is put on doctors not to prescribe ivermectin, although in other parts of the world, but usually for the most part, the less, I suppose, economically abundant parts of the world, ivermectin was used very successfully. And I mean, a group of scientists in Great Britain called the BIRD group, BIRD, it stands for British Ivermectin Research Group, or the Research Development Group, the BIRD Group, headed up by Dr. Tess Lowry. They had an active email exchange with the advisors to NIFID, begging them in effect to consider ivermectin as a valid alternative. And I've done a video about that, and the details can be found. But in a nutshell, the Irish authorities utterly and totally missed that excellent advice, pro bono advice, I hasten to add, that they were getting from colleagues in another country who were trying to do the best for the Irish healthcare system. And that was utterly, totally, completely ignored, dismissed, without any explanation, without any refutal or rebuttal of reviewed articles that the BIRD group to the Irish group to encourage them to use ivermectin. That just did not happen. And because of that, I mean, I view that again something that needs to be inquired into, and that borders on the criminal. I mean, it behoves any medical doctor to suppress valid information. You've got to take everything into the pot to try to decide which is the best forward. That's the way medicine operates.
And would it be fair to say that ivermectin, had it been allowed used, could have saved millions of lives across Europe and the world?
It would have saved lives, absolutely. It would have saved lives. I mean, for example, in the intensive care departments, it could have saved lives. Proposed, it was totally ignored. proposed running a clinical control trial. I mean, it would easily get past the committee, say in 2 hospitals, say for similar, say Waterford and Galway, for example, something like that. One group would get ivermectin, the intensive care, and others would and the others in the other group wouldn't, just to see, compare and contrast, and see is there a statistical significance between the 2 groups. And I'm confident there would be, but nothing. I mean, that's the easiest trial to run. It would be done in under 2 weeks. In fact, the trial would have to be suspended midway. The results will become so obvious and you'd be obliged to do so. But the ethics committee of both hospitals would have had no difficulty in running with that one, but it was never ever done. So there was a complete blackout on all things ivermectin and in the other remedies and therapies as well. All eggs were in one basket, and that basket was vaccine basket, with the full acknowledgement of 2 things: that it was an experimental vaccine because it hadn't gone the full distance of testing, and second, and this is bizarre, the vaccine companies were themselves immunized against litigation. They were protected from being sued. It's the taxpayer that the bill, not the company. So that carte blanche for the company to push. As any salesman would, selling shoes or you're selling vaccine, you're going to push it out as much as you can, where your loyalty is to your shareholder. It's an economic certainty, but it's a scandal.
And on that ivermectin point, not only was it ignored, it seemed it was also, I know off the mainstream media, for example, Joe Rogan had made this quite famous, that he took ivermectin and feel great after it. And the CDC said, stop taking horse dewormer. So it was like a deliberate attempt to shut down the avenue of ivermectin. And I know...
To diminish its value.
It. Yeah, yes, so not even advice ignored. And like, it's strange that even the Irish Medical Council never even, like, is it out of character that the Irish Medical Council has denied the debate regarding the effectiveness of vaccines, masks,
of course,
mandates?
It's utterly out of character. It's never happened before. It's totally out of. It's not their role. Their role is to operate the 1978 Medical Practitioners Act, where you investigate individual doctors who are believed to be a danger to society. They have considered that the doctors who have spoken out in favour of alternative, and I don't like using alternative, I mean, ivermectin's undergoes since 1960, a very, very mainstream and wonderful preparation in very many other areas as well. But I mean, any doctor that promotes that is in trouble. And I think it's because in doing so, you're in fact saying that you use emergency use medicine, if you like. In other words, what is described vaccines, that you could use ivermectin. Now, there a contrast in certain other parts of the world. Take parts of India, take the state of Uttar Pradesh, population 280 million people. They've used it successfully. Take the state of Rajasthan, I think, in India again. It used it as something like 150 million people, and it used it parts of Brazil, parts of Japan. I mean, it's been widely used here and there. It's much more used now than it had been at the beginning, but eventually so it's been shown. And there are virtually no side effects with ivermectin. You said that there are side effects with every life, but the side effects tend to be very, very minor compared to what we now know about the vaccines. And on top of that, it's prophylactic. It would allow hospital staff from getting ill. They could be where they want to be and would be at their workstation at the time when they were most needed.
Is there something very sinister about making children breathe in their own carbon dioxide for 7 hours, ask people to show their papers before entering premises, isolating elderly in their homes? What are their human rights? It seems as though to hold off such an important cure, if that is possible, and to roll out these things seems bizarre. Like, the layman was able to see that a lot of this was completely against common sense and cruel.
Correct. And you touched there on the subject of masks and children. I mean, I remember Norma Foley, the Minister of Education. I mean, she in effect stated, in fairness, she did withdraw her remark after 24 hours, but she stated that children should not be given admission to school unless they were prepared to wear a mask. Now, that's denying children their constitutional right. I had the privilege to speak to several thousand people in Merrion Square the next day about that. And in fairness, she wrote back, but I may say so in an ungracious way. They were forced to do so. You can't deny people their constitutional right. I mean, children shiver in cold classrooms wearing masks. What about the teachers themselves, their workspace? I mean, it's difficult for them, but the whole lockdown of society has caused enormous damage. For example, in an area there I have a certain element of expertise in the area of cancer. The Irish College of GPs pointed out what are called e-referrals. In other words, an electronic referral to a hospital there was something like a 72% increase in e-referrals of pigmented skin lesions. In other words, if a person had a lesion, be a melanoma type of skin cancer, that's quite rapid and kind of a poor outcome in many cases. There's something like a 72% decrease in referrals. There's a 50% decrease in breast cancer referrals, 50% give or in prostates. Bowel cancer is as stopped being by 50% as well. Now those figures have caught up since then. The damage is done. I mean, at a personal, I tried to get somebody a dermatology appointment for a mole recently, and it's just impossible. He searched a certain county in Connacht up and down, tried to find a GP, failed to find a GP, and I had no choice but to refer him into a casualty for examination, which is not what casualties are for. So it's enormously difficult sort of on GPs trying to play catch up, doubly difficult on patients that might be brewing something. I mean, in people's health, most of us, many of us are in some sort of a knife edge. If we're lucky, we'll never find out. But I mean, if it's a skin cancer, it might just be, that particular person. Or if it's something else, like a heart coming up or whatever, it's similar. So the whole medical system is behind, and you're working on top of a system that is creaking, a system that, on snapshot view a few days ago, and I did this as well on BitChute, there was 629 people trolleys, of which scandalously about 28 or 29 were children. Now that's a system of medicine that is falling asunder. That's a system that simply is functioning, delays in coming in, getting diagnosis. Your outcomes are much, much worse when it is delayed. So in other words, we're a system in meltdown. I mean, use no other word to describe it. It's a system that, in effect, has ceased to function the way in a modern, 21st century wealthy democracy. You should not have this. And then we have vast numbers of other people coming to our country, totally swamping them and our educational system. There is an awful lot wrong, an awful lot rotten, an awful lot of terminal decay within many systems in this country. And a total rewrite, a total new solution is needed, and completely new people. I mean, all political parties, as I can see it, government plus what I describe as fake opposition parties, have completely killed us. They're all in it together. And it's the public, you and me, suffer as a result of the dangerous, bizarre decisions that they make.
But it seems that there's a certain percentage of the population who are completely unaware of a lot of these things, who have been very compliant, bizarrely compliant. I can only put it down to maybe the fear that the media produced in the coronavirus initially. But the compliance level, like I've had people, I make no bones about it, I didn't take any vaccines. And the reason I didn't, I was all for it when I heard about the virus in the beginning. But then I seen a friend, Dr. Anne McCluskey up the north, speak out about people coming with complications. And then she got suspended and then removed from social media. And I thought that was very odd. And then I seen that happen internationally before it came my time for it. And I said, I'm going to hold off on this and see what's going on here. And, even I thought the way they roll out certain things in Ireland here was very wrong. I wanted to put five statements to you that are common misconceptions. Or maybe you can put them right, true or false, and we can comment on them then afterwards. So, number one, okay. If I had broke my leg and tested positive while in hospital, I was counted as a COVID hospital admission in the statistics. Would that have been true?
Well, yes, that's correct. Whether or not you were aware you were, COVID, whether or not you had any clinical signs you had COVID, you were a COVID case, not a broken leg case. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Number two, if I died in hospital due to cancer, but it tested positive a few days prior, was I counted as a COVID death in the statistics?
Yes, you'd be a COVID. That's right, and that's what the two coroner and Mayo point out, that each of them had 300 deaths over the course of the previous year, and they reviewed those, and of those, in both cases, 297 or 298 people were terminally ill with other illnesses, advanced dementia, advanced cancers, but they were recorded as the deaths.
Number three, if I had taken a PCR test and the result was positive, did I certainly have COVID-19?
But you certainly were recorded as a COVID case. In fact, if you like, the definition of a COVID case was a PCR positive person, whether they had it or they didn't have it, whether they had clinical signs or didn't clinical signs. When people come to me the first thing I want to know is how you're feeling, what's wrong with you? And if you say, well, I'm great and there's nothing wrong with me, normally that'll be the end of the conversation. So remark of COVID was a positive PCR test.
Sorry, it just lagged there in the last 30 seconds. You just mentioned something about the PCR test. Let me just check. Oh. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Hello. Hello. How we doing? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, we're back again.
We're back again. Apologies for that.
Yes, no, I can hear you. I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi, but I'm here in the basement. So
hopefully whatever we spoke about got recorded so far. But look,
I was just saying again that a COVID case is somebody who is PCR positive. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous. A person may clinically be completely well, may have pose no risk to anybody else, but yet are positive.
Yes. And number four, if I had recently received my vaccine and booster, but missed my last booster appointment and admitted to hospital for any reason, was I counted as an unvaccinated hospital admission?
I'm not sure about that. I think you would be, yes, because the schedule that you were meant to adhere to, that adherence didn't occur. Presumption. In this case, the vaccinated, yes. And of course, the same if you didn't have your booster or whatever, getting on a flight or whatever, you had to have, either a PCR negative test, but also your vaccines had to be up to date aboard it.
So it's safe to say that statistics were greatly exaggerated.
Well, I think it depends what you're counting up. I mean, if you're counting up number of PCR tests, you can easily count up number. But if you're talking about the number of people with medical illness, that wasn't really recorded. I mean, hospital admissions were recorded, but again, they were recorded just as people who might have tested positive upon arrival in hospital. So in other words, a person might go in with their appendix, and a person might be suddenly that they're COVID positive when for their appendix, and therefore they're listed as a COVID case. Now, I mean, I had one bizarre case where somebody actually sort of an appendix issue, and they arrived in one of the Dublin hospital, and they were found to be, let me get this right, were found to be negative, but they were admitted in, had their surgery. They were going to go over to the private hospital because we discovered they had VHI, but although it's on the same campus, it's a hospital, so they were tested again. Time round, they were rather unlucky. They came up with. So they couldn't go into the other hospital. They had to stay where they were. They had to be put in a COVID ward where half the people were coughing and spluttering, where you'd surely get it, if there was somebody there. And she was somebody with absolutely no sign of it. She was absolutely terrified. She discharged herself after 2 days, stitches and everything, and she's entitled to get out and got them out in the outpatient. But I mean, it was utterly outrageous. she was treated, and all because, not because of anything clinical, because of testing.
Have you had sight of the recent documentary that died suddenly?
I've heard of it, and people have generously sent it on to me. Like a lot of things, it's just a matter of trying to find the time to actually look at it. But I'm very much aware there's a huge increase in some deaths, and it's a matter of how you get the statistics going here. I mean, a person can die of, say, myocarditis, but if they were vaccinated more than, I think it's 30 days prior, it wouldn't. It's reason to statistically connect them. There is no mechanism to hook the two bits of information together. So it's quite a difficult. So that's been played out, and I want to be very sensitive in what I say because I'm very conscious there are bereaved families involved. But a case, and again, in front of Patrick O'Connor, the Mayo coroner, concerning a young 14-year-old boy. And I mean, again, stated both by the coroner and by the solicitor representing deceased and his family, something to the effect that this is a matter of urgent public health concern. Now, I couldn't agree more, and that's just a normal statement. But again, statements like that by coroners or by doctors, they don't the traction they deserve. Again, there is a single narrative, a single way of writing it up. There's a complete suppression of facts. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult on families as well, because see, if a young person dies, I mean, that enormous tragedy is going to sort of, the last thing anybody wants perhaps is a campaign built around them or anything like that. But however, these deaths have to be investigated by the coroner, and because of that, they do enter into the public domain. But again, the reporting is enormously scarce on it. Again, it boils down to the fact that we don't have a reputable, inquisitive, curious public media or television, wireless, or newspaper print to actually give a range of points of view. I mean, that used to be the way. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous the way it is now. At a personal level, I've totally given up reading the news. There's absolutely no point. And I remember growing a child, I mean, the Irish Times, when it around house, you got around and read, looked at and passed it around and all of that, and you could rely on the news in it. But nowadays you just can't. I would draw an exception to the rule, perhaps. And again, I just sort of, when I saw the Telegraph newspaper, UK newspaper, but in fairness, they seem to speak in a more sort of comprehensive way and in a more sort of bracing way than many of the Irish newspapers do, and also the British Medical Journal. And this is very important. This was the premier journal for medical doctors in the world, peer-reviewed articles. There's a debate in the British Medical Journal on a range of points of view with scholarly articles that are peer-reviewed. But none of that debate enters into Irish medical community, and normally it would. I mean, doctors read the British Medical Journal and a lot of other journals as well, just to keep up to date. You kind of have to do that. But now, if you discuss a lot of the peer-reviewed articles, you get into serious trouble. And doctors, for the most part, are tired, they're worn out, they're defeated, they're overworked, and they are compliant. And it's not active. I am ashamed of that fact.
I wanted to ask you, like, if they showed a lot of blood clotting and the coroner's reports from that documentary, and it would suggest that the vaccines are doing a lot more harm than they are good. Is that too sensitive a topic to comment on?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course, I'd love to comment on that. Anything in life, there's a risk-benefit analysis. I mean, when you cross the road, you're technically taking a risk. You to the right, you look to the left, and you make the decision to go across it, and you'll arrive on the other side. And this applies with any form of medicine. There ought to be a risk-benefit analysis as well. The presumption is that the benefit will exceed risk. Now, we know the risk for young people dying of COVID, for example, or getting seriously ill with COVID, something like 0.02%. It's incredibly low. The absence of having a serious a risk factor such as cystic fibrosis or whatever else might be. In the absence of all of that. For the ordinary young, robust teenager, the chances of them getting any adverse effect out of COVID or any other form of infectious disease commonly found in Ireland, with the exception maybe of meningitis, tends to be very remote, that there's going to be any problem there. So therefore, risk benefit, why take a risk if there is no benefit? At the other end of life, it's a very different scenario where people must be kept sort of perhaps cocooned to some extent, or perhaps kept away from infectious disease, as the common flu or anything else as well. But the problem, I suppose, the whole thing is, and the vaccine associated with it, is that it now appears that risk does exceed benefit. And some countries have refined their vaccination schedule to take account of that, and have more or less excluded younger people from the regime, from the vaccination regime, that would not have been so, a number of months previously. Everybody was recommended that they have it. In Ireland, we've not done that. Again, there's this one push in one direction as an unhealthy thing to do. But the numbers, unfortunately, will stack up, and there's going to be more pathology, more risk, and dare I say it, more deaths than there from COVID. It's very, very scandalous.
I want to ask you a quick question. I know you're strapped for time. What of the WEF involvement? A lot of people now are saying maybe it's conspiracy theory, but you hear with these digital IDs, they want for travel, international travel, cashless society, and they also wanted a depopulation of society. And the fact that the health advice has not only been ignored, but completely done a U-turn on, seems like more and more that this is something that is behind the scenes.
Yeah, I don't know. Certainly individual people have sort of expressed bizarre comments about the world being overpopulated and things like that. Take example, an offshoot of all of this. With globalism here, for example, the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is, I suppose, a offshoot of the UN, and maybe they all feed in some way or other, or influenced by the World Economic Forum. But the World Health Organization now are making a globalist grab on our health. They have bringing forth a pandemic treaty. They expect countries to sign that treaty. Ireland has said we will sign that treaty, even though we haven't actually read the wording of the treaty. It hasn't been published yet. But despite that, we have said that we're going to sign that treaty. That treaty allows the WHO to decide what a pandemic is. It allows the WHO to decide how to treat the pandemic, whatever the pandemic is, what they give and what treatments to hold. So, for example, all local experts will be completely and totally bypassed. If the World Health Organization were to decide swine flu or COVID or ordinary flu is a pandemic, they will decide that that is the pandemic. They will decide how to treat it. But they also define a pandemic ways. You can have a pandemic of obesity, you can have a pandemic of cancer, you can have a pandemic of many, many other things. At the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, which is an offshoot of it, they're deciding what a pandemic is. If we sign this World Health Organization pandemic treaty, which we said we will sign, our politicians, our political leaders have said they will sign it, even though they haven't actually read what the treaty is about. They're told what it is about. We are particularly in this country over enthusiastic about the treaty, because not only have we said we'll sign it, we're a member of a small number of other nations who are described as friends of the treaty. Can you imagine? It hasn't even been published yet, but it does mean that WHO will decide what a pandemic is. They will decide, and the new pandemic up with all things associated with climate. Their point of view, let's make no mistake about that. And then they will decide how to treat it, to the exclusion of other treatments. They alone will decide. Our own experts won't be consulted. So, for example, they might decide that Chinese-style lockdowns might be the way forward, masks wearing, vaccination, whatever might be the way forward, and we have no say whatsoever. And not that the WHO is pushing that countries that sign then suddenly say, well, we do our own thing in this particular set of circumstances, will be financially penalized for doing so. Let's be clear about this. The WHO used to be funded by nation states, each giving according to their means. And they did a good job for the most part out in places like Africa and Asia, the developed world, underdeveloped world, doing sort of getting rid of malaria, whatever. They were not involved in the Western world until just before COVID. And the reason for that is private funding is entering into the situation. And for example, the biggest contributor is as a country, but that is followed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And after that comes the United States. So while I don't have the figures in front of me here, I think Germany gives something like 1.2 billion, and the Bill and Melinda Gates give about 780 million, and the United States about 680 million. We give, of course, much less than that. And in other words, once you get private funding, the Rockefeller Foundation and Soros, a range of other people to a greater or lesser extent have contributed over the last number of years as well. So private funding, very major way forward with WHO. So that has completely and totally changed our focus from the developing world to the developed world. So they now want a pandemic response treaty where they will decide what a pandemic is. They will decide how to treat it, and they will decide above all how not to treat it. They will have total control. So in effect, surrendering our health sovereignty. And that's one major aspect, because sovereignty isn't only about health, as we now know. It's about travel, it's about international travel, it's about a range of other things, even leaving your own home, for example. I mean, there was a time when we were down within our immediate districts by 2 kilometres or something like that. And they may very well decide that. Look what's happening in China, for example. You may say, well, that's the end of the world. Yes, but if there's a treaty in place, what happens there happens here. And there is no discussion, least of all with our own experts. So if we sign up to this, we're locked in to yet another globalist treaty that we're going to difficulty getting out of without serious penalty. And our government and the fake opposition parties, they're all on the same hymn sheet here, believe we should sign up to this treaty. In effect, I mean, we have enough expertise in Ireland. We know our local situation. We've the youngest, sparsely populated country in Europe, as best as I know. Compare and contrast with the Netherlands, for example, where they're on top of each other and an older society. You cannot say one size fits all. Public health and communicable diseases depend upon geographical spread, age, demographics, all of these things. And the WHO will ignore that to have a one-size-fits-all philosophy. And it's a philosophy not based on health, it's a philosophy based on politics. That the WHO is a political organization where its president general is promoted by different countries. In this particular case, he's promoted by China. And not only that, his own parliament, I've often said, has described him as a terrorist. The Global Index on Terrorism has described him as a terrorist. The man's not fit for office. The man should not be in charge of the WHO. The man in jail.
You spoke there about personal sovereignty, and I want to bring you back to Ireland for a moment. What do you think the real motivation behind this new proposed hate speech bill is? Is it a front to present as though it's a rigging your rights?
Absolutely.
It seems like a front
to
present
I mean,
as a
it's
human
still
rights
utterly
issue.
Debate.
Yeah, but it's actually
a human rights issue.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's an outrageous attempt to stifle debate is the bedrock of society, the bedrock of democracy. Democracy depends upon debate. It depends upon people, but I stress in a respectful and dignified way, communicating with each other. Of course you do that. I mean, if a person verbally assaults somebody or whatever, that's outrage and that should not happen. Of course not. To be able to discuss a wide range of normal ordinary issues, certainly concerning various sort of social issues that sort of this country has sort of obsessed on over the last number of years. I mean, these are things that need debate, need discussion, need openness, need transparency. And if you shut down debate, it in fact creates, and this is another problem, it creates a two-speed system, those with protected characteristics and there are those who are not. There are people who are more equal or less equal the law. I believe everybody should be equal before the law. With that comes a responsibility to be, for example, respectful to another person's opinion. Absolutely. And that also is, I mean, to good manners amongst other things. But to be able to sort of shut debate and to say somebody is offended as a result of what a person might say, and because of that, that to be described as hate speech. And I don't even like the use of the word hate speech. On a personal level, there is a hateful bone in my body, but yet it appears that is promoting hate speech by defending free speech. Utterly different things. A good example of that might be what befallen a certain teacher currently in Mountjoy Jail. We all know that particular set of circumstances where he, because of his conscience, as far as I understand it, and I don't know the full set of circumstances here, I hasten to add, because of his conscience, he chose not to address a young person by certain pronouns because they offended against his conscience. And he chose not to. Now, the net effect is he's in jail because of that. Now, you could well say he's in jail because of breach of a court order, but it's a technicality. That's the fig leaf. Let's talk. We live in the real world. Let's talk about the reality of the situation. The reality is that he is there because he chose not to use pronoun they. And that is a typical example of how we can fall into the pit of free speech denial when these laws come in. It's going much, much worse and will criminalize points of view. That's all. Of view. You can be prosecuted for up to 5 years in prison, not because of what you do, but because of what you say. And that is kind of outrageous assault on free speech. It's an attempt to, I suppose, by government listening to various NGOs who have dominated media and who've dominated, therefore dominated government, because government obviously wants the approval of media. And what have you got? You have people who have been listened to, and you have large numbers of people, I believe the majority of Irish people, who are not being listened to. So this is an example of something that will slip through. It doesn't require a referendum, unfortunately. It'll simply slip through Parliament unless it is vigorously opposed. And I'm pessimistic about the whole thing, but we'll give it our best shot. And on this coming Saturday, as many of us know, there will be a free speech rally in O'Connell Street, Dublin, 1 p.m. And I would invite absolutely everybody to come to it. It's very important. It's not only for yourself, it's for future generations as well, where we're able to express ourselves. In simple things, for example, I mean, if a person, say, had a point of view and simply expressed it, and if somebody found it to be offensive, they may very well have you reported. What, for example, two doctors were discussing something, and if they formed the opinion that person, a patient, happens to be a man by the very virtue of the fact that he possesses a Y chromosome and therefore in a biological sense is a man and therefore is a man, or in the absence of a Y chromosome is female, for example, is there a possibility that hate speech could be put into play there? What about the clergyman that occupies his pulpit on Sunday, and he may very well speak something from the scriptures concerning man and woman? In that case, is there an element of hate speech? What about the Irish Constitution, for example, not the Constitution, the proclamation about ownership of the island of Ireland by the people of Ireland? And how do you define that? Ireland not only free but Gaelic, Ireland not only Gaelic but free. In other words, the Gaelic people that own the island of Ireland. Is that not? Could you not say that there's an element of hate speech there? Things can be picked through. And when you bring in an act of Parliament, you never know how it's going to play out. And it's played out in the courts. It's the courts that interpret acts of Parliament. I mean, you know that more than most. And therefore, you're in a situation where you're on very dangerous ground, dangerous territory, because you can't predict final outcomes here. And I would be very, very wary about this imposition on our normal, ordinary freedoms, which are the bedrock of democracy. Democracy depends upon opinion, depends upon free speech, depends upon the exchange of ideas, and depends upon a flexibility of mind, allows you to change those ideas necessary, and at all times, as I always say, expressed in a dignified and responsible way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even it's this incitement word as well. Like, who's to know that our conversation right now, talking about the vaccinated, non-vaccinated, couldn't be incitement in someone else's mind in the future. It compels common law speech which I know Canada did, and it was a disaster. But I want to actually get, because you touched on it there, and I
Correct.
know you're passionate about this. Can you elaborate what's happening in the country regarding the immigration issue and what's the risks that can amount to?
Well, there are massive risks. I mean, first of all, there's risk to our services. I mean, at a basic level, if there's the basic economic supply and demand. I mean, take housing, for example, take young people, take rents, take purchase houses. I mean, there's a vast short. That always was a problem in the not too last 20 years probably, with the whole area of the housing market. Compared to many European countries, our prices are completely inflated. But having said all that, when you throw other people into the mix, you have a massive problem, because you have competition for limiting resources. Now, what I really sort of the difficulty with is we have 11,000 homeless people in Ireland, and that's an underestimate, because that underestimates those people are living on other people's couches, and people approaching middle age living still with their parents, and there's that sort of overshoot of that very basic 11,000 people. But nothing for those. There have been no sense of emergence, no sense of help, and yet when people are coming from abroad, talking about modular homes, as I often said, that are very, very fit for purpose, homes that are very good homes that a person can live in a comfortable way, but ourselves cannot apply for them. We are denied them. There's a two-speed system. We're put at the bottom of the heap by our own people, our own country, and that is utterly, totally wrong. But quite apart from that, if you bring people from other countries, especially international protection people from part Africa or the Middle East into Ireland. I mean, people whose culture is completely different than ours, whose way of life is completely different than ours. Quite apart from the whole concept of fit in, there's a concept of I suppose, social disorder, social chaos that can arise from. We want to avoid this in our own country. I mean, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we fought hard to form this country, create this country, govern this country, make it our country, in precisely the same the French have done to France, the Spanish have done to Spain, the Czechs done to Czech, so on and so forth. There's nothing unusual about that. We like a country that has been fought for, that has nourished us, that has brought us up, and that we are loyal to. To have it in effect taken away from us, I feel very, very passionate about that. So it's not only a matter of resources for housing, resources for health, resources for education, and all the fact that these things cannot, in fact, denied to us now because overwhelming numbers of people that we can't take on board. There's also the whole philosophical concept of what sort of a nation do we want? What sort of a nation do we want? For example, we saw this week and last week in Carlingford, for example, a large number of people about whom we know nothing except nobody's been vetted, put into the village. We've seen that in East as well. The question to be asked is, of course, in 5 years' time, or in 10 years' time, what sort of a town do you want? Each young male coming, no doubt, will have a family coming in a few weeks or a few months' time. So you will very, very rapidly have a very multicultural system that will not necessarily function very well. A small country, we're a small nation, we're a small people. If people come to Ireland, my personal belief is there should be a right of return for all Irish people who are in our diaspora abroad. And those are the people that we should be seeking and we should be asked to come home. And I don't just mean people who might have left in our generation or a previous generation to us in the not too distant past. I'm talking about people that might have left many, many centuries even before that. People who consider themselves to be Irish, people who went during the famine, people who went with the persecutions before that. But indeed, the Irish armies that left wild geese after the second siege of Limerick. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they too are Irish. They too are equally Irish to me. They too should have an automatic right of return to our country. Those are the people, talented, vibrant, genetically linked to our land. Those are the people that we should be inviting back, not giving a free pass to the rest of the world. But having said that, I'm utterly and totally in favour of giving accommodation, giving protection to genuine refugees refugees from genuine war zones in parts of countries affected by war. So, for example, people in war zones in eastern Ukraine are very welcome as far as I am concerned. Those small numbers of genuine refugees who will come, seek protection, and go back again to rebuild their lives. They're genuine refugees. We did that with the Hungarians in the 1956. We did that to the Kosovans way back about 20 years ago. Farmers that came in this country where their farms were destroyed, they spent a number of months and they went back to get their sort of businesses up and running again. That was a success story, and that's what we should concentrate on. But instead, we seem to be giving a free pass to the rest of the world to come to Ireland with the deliberate aim of diluting Irish people, the Irish nation, and in effect creating a forced upon us multicultural society that once we do it, we can't unravel it. That's the difficulty. A very difficult thing to unravel when you do that. And I believe it would be disastrous to Irish culture, Irish tradition, the Irish way of life, our Christian heritage, and a range of other things that make us unique and distinctly Irish. Now, upon the Ukraine, for example, I mean, this is another example of a government in chaos, a government following the leaders, following the crowd, pandering to Europe. Our one great skill in this country's negotiation, our one great skill is the ability to bring people together, especially regarding border disputes. And no country in Europe should know more about border disputes than this country. And we have the very skills and the attitude, relaxed mood, if you like, to bring opposite sides together, hammer out a deal, for want of a better word. And yet we have in effect declared economic war and almost political war on Russia. We have taken sides. We very well sort of say that one side's better than the other side. If you wish, people will have private points of view on that. I'm not so sure. But having said that, to actually go with the flow with the rest of Europe or a lot of Europe and to in effect declare economic war on one side and then whinge when our prices of electricity and our prices of gas and everything else goes up is ridiculous. We should have stood aside. We should have thought about our neutrality, our sovereignty. We should have said, how can we help this situation? What can we do? What are our skills? I read there that the Irish now will be participating in training Ukrainian soldiers. There's no need for that. They're not going to make much impact anyway, that's sure. But it sends a signal. And Russian Prime Minister, Russian ambassador in Ireland, His Excellency Filatov, I think, did state that in his sort of point of view and in the point of view of his government, that in effect virtually declares military war on Russia. I mean, do we not know the pitfalls that we're walking into? Can we not see the abyss that could be staring us in the face? We need to back from the brink at this late stage, recognize our sovereignty, and above all, call those who have betrayed that sovereignty to account. Our government and our fake opposition. These are the people who have taken sides. There was the ridiculous example there a few weeks ago in Dublin. There was a march, and the march was calling for Irish sovereignty or for Irish neutrality, and it was led by the predictable people against Profit and Sinn Féin and all. And the way they started was, we clearly support the Ukraine, and by the way, we're neutral. I mean, you cannot have that attitude. You're either neutral or you're not neutral. And if you're neutral, you offer your neutral skills to try to bring about resolution to the conflict. So, I mean, we're poorly served by politicians. We're poorly served, be they in government, be they in fake opposition. My concern is that as a small nation on the periphery of Europe, with a vast Atlantic Ocean and a vast Atlantic coastline, we are vulnerable in cases of any conflict. And we're unaware of that. I mean, I will say no hesitation in saying that if there was nuclear conflict that broke out, both Shannon and Dublin airports would be one of the first places hit, because it'd have to be, because their runways are over 10,000 feet long. And people aren't told those simple facts. And you know what? In the Great War, in the 1914, 1918, nobody expected it to develop into the conflict it developed. There was an obscure incident involving an assassination in Sarajevo. It took 3 months later after that before the world descended into World War I. In the Second World War, there was a dispute over the free city of Danzig. There you had a situation where a population, a German-speaking city, wanted to be part of Germany, and the League of Nations no, and it escalated. And nobody thought a world war would arise out of a city called Danzig in East Germany, or in where was it, in Western Poland. It then became part of Gdansk. But the point I'm making really is we sleepwalk into conflicts. The longer this is lasting, the greater the possibility of calamity, the great possibility of a missile going astray, and that happened 2 weeks ago. And the greater the possibility of retaliation. So if we are seeing people who have taken sides, we are part of that conflict, and we cannot say otherwise. So it's essential at this late stage for our politicians to be called to account on this when they are gambling with our lives. And not only that, Zelensky in the Ukraine is gambling with the lives of Europe. I never met a person, a minister, I never heard of a prime minister so belligerent when it comes to trying to involve NATO, so determined to turn the conflict into a European conflict rather than local border dispute that in effect it is, involving a Russian minority trapped behind Ukrainian frontier, want to incorporate into Russia. Why can't this country organize or suggest a referendum with the people that could be internationally supervised in that area? That's all it takes. And if that referendum is respected, you simply rebuild the border. Imagine if our own border commission in 1924 was respected. We would have a very, very different drawing of the border on the island of Ireland. But we don't do that because we've taken sides to be the good boys of Europe, to get the good pat on the head from whoever. Our leadership, our political leadership, have sold sovereignty out.
I know we're coming towards the end of our chat here, but I just wanted to make a few points. As a Christian with 3 young children, it almost seems like biblical times we're living in, because you have these wars, you have these, falling of birth rates and increasing the death rates, and these reports that when I come out, they make me angry. They make me almost vengeful also, and I'm just speaking as the layman walking around. When I've seen locally young faces who've come and gone in the last month, only multiple of them, and they don't know what happened. It's not chalked down to anything. And people have said, you need to distract yourself with other things. You're getting too worked up about these matters. But I don't know about that, because I think that if I distract yourself, it's not productive. There's no motivation to go out and march like we should be doing. Taking to the streets, like every week more children are lined up to take this vaccine, and there is evidence that it could well be harmful. So the idea, my idea, is that we're not to be silent. And I know there is a member of the population, but there's this divide and conquer thing that happened, I think, when people took the vaccine and didn't. They argued about it in the beginning, and now they don't want to hear about the evidence towards it. And it's bizarre to me because, there's lives at stake here. This seems to me like a hill to die on. What's your opinion on it?
Correct. Well, what I would say is, it's very, very simple. Each of us have our own responsibility. And for those of us who are awake, we have a responsibility to wake up others. This is a fight. This is a fight to the finish. There's no doubt about that. And I like your sort of analogy that is of biblical proportions, because of course it certainly is. I personally, at a personal level, there's a spiritual dimension to this, make a mistake about this. But again, I'm prepared to say that for those of us who are awake, for those of us who are aware of the situation, it behoves us. We have a responsibility, I use the word a Christian responsibility, to go out and to wake up others and to be loud and be heard and be involved. Not to be involved is compliant, is being complicit in what is going on. For those of us who have a and who get out there. We need to get out. We need to spread the message. We need to participate in what is happening. We need to aim to hold government and fake opposition to account. We need to have them replaced. We need a new system. We need to build up something new and something powerful. That's only going to come from the grassroots. It's only going to come from the people involved with so many other people in Hold the Line. And The Line is a marvellous organisation, sovereign people who stand on routes and motorways and bridges and train stations and promenades throughout all of Ireland with the yellow and black boards, wakening people up, challenging the government, calling them to account, pointing out the fitness of opposition and concentrating on major issues that are central to the survival of our nation and of our people. And because of that, the Free Speech Rally is a good example of that, occurring on the 3rd of December, this coming Saturday in O'Connell's in Dublin. We need to start there, because if you can't say it, if you can't display a yellow and black board calling the government to account for fear of getting 5 years in jail, and this is this they want, the government, they want to create fear. They want to make people fearful, because if you're fearful, you will be less active. You will give it over, the baton over to somebody else, and that person will pass on to yet somebody else. There is a need for each and every one of us to stand together as we're bound together in this great fight, in this great endeavour to save this nation from destruction. And I stress, we're on the brink of that. So there's a need for people to get out and for people to be visible, be seen, use our talents, and above all, put our arms around this nation and our traditions, our culture, our Christian heritage, stand firm and say no to those who want to betray us, destroy us, demolish us, get rid of us, if you like, and walk all over. And I say no, no, no to that.
That's well said. And I want to just end this interview by saying that on behalf of the Irish people who feel censored, silenced, and discriminated against, we appreciate it very much, your stance. I know you probably had to make a massive sacrifice in your field and by reputation tarnishing by stepping forward, and it is appreciated, as well as the people from Hold the Line who stand up every weekend in the hail and rain and wind and hold up their banners. So I want to say thank you to yourself and thank you to them also.
Thank you very much appreciated, and thank you for having me on this podcast this evening.
Appreciate that, and I will see you out there.
Our international colleagues and our Irish colleagues. We seek honesty, but we seem to be working in a profession, in an industry that is driven by dishonesty, and that deeply concerns me.